I still remember the coldness of the earth beneath my fingers as I clawed desperately at the opening above me, watching in horror as it seemed to seal itself shut. The musty scent of soil and decay filled my lungs, and for a moment I thought I might suffocate in this strange underground cavern I'd stumbled into. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for my phone, activating the flashlight with trembling fingers. What the beam illuminated made my blood turn to ice, not because it was terrifying, but because it was familiar, hauntingly, impossibly familiar. My name is Meridian Thorne, and I never expected a simple mushroom foraging expedition to unearth the secrets my family had buried for 3 decades. But when you're desperate enough to search the forest floor for extra income, you sometimes discover things that were never meant to be found. It started with necessity. After losing my job at the local newspaper, when they downsized their staff, I found myself struggling to make ends meet. My modest savings dwindled rapidly as I searched for new employment, and each rejection letter felt like another nail in the coffin of my financial stability. My grandmother Cordelia had taught me to identify wild mushrooms when I was young, chanterelles, morels, and the prized matsutakes that high-end restaurants would pay handsomely for. It seemed like a reasonable stopgap to supplement my dwindling bank account. The Ardmore Forest had always been part of my family's history. My grandfather had owned several acres of it before selling most of the land to developers, keeping only a small parcel that bordered our family property. Growing up, I'd heard countless stories about the forest's abundance, the berries, the mushrooms, the wildlife that sustained generations of thorns before supermarkets and convenience replaced foraging skills. That crisp autumn morning, I'd set out before dawn, basket in hand, dressed in layers against the chill. The forest floor was damp from recent rain, perfect conditions for mushroom hunting. By mid-morning, my basket was half full with golden chanterelles and a few choice morels. Perhaps not enough for a significant profit, but a decent haul for a few hours' work. It was while pursuing a promising patch of growth near an old rotting log that I noticed something unusual. A cluster of chanterelles growing in an almost perfect circle. Mycologists call these fairy rings, and they're not uncommon, but this one seemed peculiarly regular. As I knelt to harvest them, I felt the ground shift beneath me, subtle at first, then dramatically. Before I could scramble away, the earth opened like a trap door, and I was falling. The drop wasn't far, perhaps 7 feet, but it was enough to knock the wind from my lungs when I landed. Disoriented and gasping, I took stock of my surroundings once my phone light cut through the darkness. I was in some sort of underground space, roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, with earthen walls reinforced by old timber supports. But it was what lined those walls that made my heart stutter. Shelves of objects, documents, and photos of my family. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in some kind of bunker or storage room. The air was surprisingly dry for an underground space, suggesting it had been purposefully constructed and maintained. Moving my light across the nearest shelf, I saw mason jars filled with what appeared to be preserved documents, boxes labeled with years spanning from the 1970s to the 1990s, and most disturbingly, a wedding photo of my parents with a third figure scissored out, leaving only a disembodied hand on my mother's shoulder. My fingers trembled as I reached for one of the jars, unscrewing the lid to find papers perfectly preserved inside, protected from moisture and decay. The first document was a deed, not just any deed, but one bearing my name. Meridian Elise Thorne, named as the inheritor of property I'd never known existed, 500 acres of land in the Ardmore Valley, valued at over $2 million in 1989. I sank to my knees, confusion clouding my thoughts. My family had always lived modestly. My father, Barrett, worked as a high school biology teacher, and my mother, Odessa, managed a small local bookstore. We weren't poor, but there had certainly never been any indication of hidden wealth or property. The deed was signed by someone named Claudia Thorne, a name I'd never heard before, yet apparently a relative who had died when I was just 3 years old. Time seemed to stand still in that underground chamber as I moved from jar to jar, document to document, uncovering fragments of a family history entirely foreign to me. There were letters addressed to my father from this Claudia, speaking of arrangements and provisions for me specifically. There were bank statements showing regular transfers from accounts I didn't recognize to accounts in my parents' names, substantial amounts that disappeared around my 18th birthday, and most chillingly, there were legal documents with my signature on them, or what appeared to be my signature, relinquishing rights to properties and funds I had no memory of ever claiming. The most recent document was dated just 5 years ago, when I'd been going through a particularly difficult period after my divorce from Wesley. I remembered signing some papers my parents had presented as insurance documents during that chaotic time. Had those actually been the final surrenders of an inheritance I'd never known existed? A photograph slipped from between the pages of one folder, a faded Polaroid showing a woman with my eyes and my smile, holding a baby I assumed was me, standing in front of a large farmhouse with sprawling fields behind it. On the back, written in fading ink, Claudia and Meridian at North Haven Farm, September 1989. North Haven Farm. The name stirred something in my memory, a conversation overheard between my parents years ago, hushed tones discussing what to do about North Haven and whether she would ever find out. The discovery of an inheritance I'd been kept ignorant of was shocking enough, but what truly chilled me was the methodical documentation of its concealment. This wasn't casual family secrecy. This was calculated deception spanning decades, and I had apparently been signing away my birthright without even knowing it existed. When I finally managed to pull myself from the documents, I realized with a start that several hours had passed. The entrance I'd fallen through was too high to reach, and my phone showed no service. Panic threatened to overtake me until I noticed what appeared to be a door set into one of the earthen walls, partially concealed by a shelf. With effort, I managed to shift the shelf aside and found an old wooden door with a simple latch. It opened with a groan of protest, revealing a narrow tunnel reinforced with timber supports. With no other options, I gathered as many documents as I could fit into my mushroom basket, using my phone's light to guide me through the passage. The tunnel extended for what felt like 100 yards, gradually sloping upward until it terminated at another door. This one was padlocked from the other side, but years of moisture had rotted the wood around the hasp. With desperate strength, born of claustrophobia and determination, I rammed my shoulder against it repeatedly, until the lock tore free. Fresh air rushed in as the door swung outward, and I emerged blinking into late afternoon sunlight. I found myself behind an old shed that stood at the edge of my parents' property, a shed I'd been expressly forbidden from entering throughout my childhood, with warnings of rusty nails and unstable flooring. Now I understood why. Standing there, basket full of evidence of my family's deception, I faced a decision that would alter everything. Confront my parents immediately, investigate further on my own, consult a lawyer. The weight of 30 years of lies pressed down on me, making it difficult to think clearly. I opted for further investigation before confrontation. If my family had gone to such lengths to hide this from me, I needed to understand exactly what this was before showing my hand. I returned home, not to my small apartment, but to my childhood bedroom in my parents' house, where I'd been staying temporarily since losing my job. The irony wasn't lost on me, seeking shelter with the very people who had apparently stolen my legacy. My parents were out for the evening at their weekly bridge game, giving me time to examine my findings more carefully. Spread across my childhood bed were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite assemble. Property deeds, bank statements, letters, and photographs documenting a systematic dismantling of what should have been my inheritance. The central figure in all this was Claudia Thorne, apparently my grandmother, though I'd been raised believing that both my paternal grandparents had died before I was born. According to the letters, Claudia had been estranged from her son, my father, for reasons never explicitly stated, but had maintained a separate relationship with my mother. She had designated substantial assets specifically for me, with my parents as trustees, until I turned 25. I had turned 33 last spring, and I'd never seen a penny of what should have been mine. The largest asset was clearly North Haven Farm, 500 acres of prime agricultural land that had apparently been sold off in parcels over the years, with the proceeds supposedly placed in trust for me. According to my calculations based on the bank statements, the total value would have been well over $3 million in today's money that had somehow disappeared. At the bottom of my basket, I found a sealed envelope addressed simply to my dearest Meridian. The handwriting matched the notes on the back of the photographs, Claudia's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. "My dearest granddaughter," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have discovered what should never have been hidden from you. North Haven has been in our family for 6 generations, and it was always my intention that it should pass directly to you. I see in you the same connection to the land that I have always felt, a connection your father never shared or understood." The letter went on to explain that Claudia had created a trust for me, bypassing her son due to what she called his reckless financial decisions and rejection of his heritage. She had appointed my mother as co-trustee, with specific instructions that I was to be fully informed of my inheritance upon Claudia's death, with graduated access beginning at 18 and full control at 25. If this letter reaches you and you have not been made aware of your inheritance, the letter concluded, then a grave injustice has been done to you. The documentation you need to reclaim what is rightfully yours is contained within this room. Trust no one with this information until you have secured legal protection. I fear that if my wishes have been ignored thus far, those who have betrayed my intentions will go to great lengths to maintain their deception. all my love, your grandmother, Claudia." The sound of my parents' car in the driveway jolted me from my stunned absorption. Hastily, I gathered the documents and shoved them under my bed, my heart racing as I heard their voices downstairs. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own parents. Not physically, but afraid of what they were capable of. The people who had read me bedtime stories and bandaged my scraped knees had also systematically stolen my inheritance and constructed an elaborate lie about my family history. Over dinner, I studied them with new eyes. My father Barrett, with his perpetually ink-stained fingers from grading papers, my mother Odessa, with her reading glasses perched on her nose. How could these seemingly ordinary people have orchestrated such a betrayal? "You're quiet tonight, Mary," my mother observed, passing me the salad. "Rough day job hunting?" I managed a non-committal response, noticing for the first time how her eyes never quite met mine when she asked about my financial situation. Had there always been guilt lurking behind her concern? "I went mushroom hunting in Ardmore Forest today," I said casually, watching their reactions. "Found quite a few chanterelles." My father's fork paused midway to his mouth. "Ardmore? That's quite a walk from here. What made you go all that way?" "I remembered Grandma Cordelia saying the best mushrooms grew there," I replied, inventing a conversation that had never happened with my mother's mother, the only grandparent I had supposedly known. My parents exchanged a quick glance, so brief I might have missed it had I not been watching for exactly such a reaction. "I don't recall my mother ever foraging for mushrooms," my mother said lightly. She wasn't the outdoorsy type. "Must have been something I read then." I backpedaled. The forest was beautiful, though. So many old growth sections still untouched. My father seemed to relax slightly. "Most of that land belongs to the Ardmore Development Corporation now. Has for decades. Not much old growth left, I'm afraid." "The Ardmore Development Corporation?" I repeated. "Who owns that?" Another glance between them. "Various investors, I imagine," my father replied. "Big companies usually are. Why the interest?" "Just curious about the future of the forest. Hate to see it all turned into strip malls and condos." Dinner continued with mundane conversation, but I felt a new undercurrent of tension. That night, I lay awake listening to my parents' murmured conversation through the heating vent that had always carried sound from their room to mine, a childhood secret that had once let me eavesdrop on discussions of Christmas presents and now delivered something far more sinister. "She was asking about Ardmore." My father's voice came through, concern evident in his tone. "It's nothing," my mother responded. "How could she possibly know? All those records are secured." "The property goes on the market next month, the final parcel. Once that's done, there's nothing to find." "We should move up the timeline, get it listed now." "Hargrove says we'll lose at least $300,000 if we rush it." "And if she discovers the truth, we lose everything." Their voices dropped too low for me to hear more, but I'd heard enough. The next day, I called in sick to my part-time job at the local coffee shop and made my way to the county records office. If there was an official trail of this inheritance and its diversion, I would find it. The records clerk, a woman named Tabitha, who'd been working there since before I was born, greeted me warmly. "Meridian Thorne, haven't seen you since you were doing research for the newspaper. What brings you in today?" I mustered my most casual smile. "Family history project, looking into my paternal grandmother's property holdings. Claudia Thorne died in the early 90s. Tabitha's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. Thorne properties? Let me see what we have on file. After 30 minutes of searching, she returned with a perplexed expression. That's odd. There are references to Thorne holdings in the cross indexes, but the actual files seem to be missing. All of them. Missing? How is that possible? She shook her head. Records this old, sometimes they get misfiled or checked out for court proceedings and never returned. I can tell you that there are references to North Haven Farm under Thorne ownership until 1993, then transfers to Ardmore Development Corporation starting in 94. And who owns Ardmore Development Corporation? Tabitha consulted her computer. It's a privately held company. Ownership records would be with the State Business Registry. By late afternoon, I had traced Ardmore Development Corporation to a shell company, which was owned by another shell company, which eventually led back to BTO Investments, Barrett Thorne, and Odessa Thorne Investments. My parents. They hadn't simply stolen my inheritance. They had created an elaborate corporate structure to launder it through, selling off my grandmother's land piece by piece while maintaining the fiction that it had never been mine to begin with. That evening, when I returned home, there was an unexpected visitor sitting in our living room. My Uncle Forrester, my father's younger brother, whom I'd seen perhaps a dozen times in my life. He lived on the West Coast and rarely returned to our small Pennsylvania town. "Meridian," he exclaimed, rising to embrace me with an enthusiasm that seemed forced. "What a wonderful coincidence that I'm visiting just as you've moved back home." My mother handed him a drink, her knuckles white around her own glass. Forrester was just passing through on business. Lucky timing. There's nothing lucky about it. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew with sudden clarity that my parents had called him. They suspected I knew something, and they were circling the wagons. "Business must be good," I observed, noting his expensive watch and tailored suit. "What is it you do again, Uncle Forrester?" "This and that," he replied vaguely. "Property development mostly." "How interesting. Any developments around here?" My father cut in quickly. "Forrester is considering investing in some local projects. Nothing definite yet." The evening proceeded with uncomfortable small talk, my parents and uncle exchanging meaningful glances when they thought I wasn't looking. After dinner, I excused myself to my room, leaving my door cracked open just enough to hear their hushed conversation. "She knows something." My uncle's voice was urgent. "I told you, both the separate trust was too risky. You should have dissolved everything after Claudia died." "We needed the income stream," my father responded. "The school never paid enough, and with Meridian's college expenses—" "College expenses?" My uncle's laugh was harsh. "You sent her to state school on a partial scholarship when she could have gone anywhere with what was in that trust. Don't pretend this was about her education." "Regardless," my mother interjected, "what's done is done. The final property goes on the market next week. Once it's sold and the funds are moved offshore, there's nothing to find. No paper trail." "And if she's already found something?" Silence followed, heavy and ominous. "We'll have to discredit her," my father finally said, his voice so cold I barely recognized it. The divorce hit her hard. There were those anxiety medications. We could suggest she's having some kind of breakdown. "Barrett?" My mother sounded shocked. She's our daughter? And I'm trying to protect her, he responded sharply. Better she spend some time in treatment than pursue this and have everything exposed. Do you want to go to prison, Odessa? Do you want her to know everything we've done? The implication that there was even more I didn't know chilled me to the bone. I spent the night securing the documents I'd found, taking photographs of each page with my phone, and emailing them to myself before hiding the originals in a waterproof hiking bag buried in the back of my closet. Whatever happened next, I needed evidence that couldn't be easily destroyed. The following morning, I called the only person I thought might help me navigate this nightmare, my ex-husband Wesley. Despite our divorce, 3 years earlier, we'd maintained a cautious friendship, and more importantly, he was an attorney specializing in estate law. If anyone could help me understand what I was dealing with, it would be him. We met at a cafe in the next town over, where there was little chance of running into my parents or their friends. Wesley looked much the same as he always had. Practical, serious, with kind eyes that had once looked at me with love and now held concern. This better be important, Meridian, he said as he sat down. Your text sounded like life or death. It's about my grandmother Claudia Thorne, I began. His brow furrowed. Your grandmother? I thought both your father's parents died before you were born. That's what you always told me. That's what I always believed, I corrected, and proceeded to tell him everything. The underground room, the documents, the conversations I'd overheard. As I spoke, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock to what appeared to be genuine fear. Stop, he said finally, holding up a hand. Don't tell me anything more. What? Why? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Because I'm not just any attorney, Mary. I work for Callaway, Briggs & Turner. Our firm has represented the Ardmore Development Corporation for 15 years. The implication struck me like a physical blow. You knew? All this time you knew about my inheritance? No, he protested. God, no. I handle commercial real estate transactions for the firm. I've done work for Ardmore, yes, but I had no idea it was connected to your family. The ownership records are private. I just saw the corporate entity. My mind raced, trying to process this new complication. But now that you know, you can help me, right? You have access to records, transaction histories. Wesley looked genuinely pained. Meridian, I can't help you, not directly. What you're describing, if it's true, is fraud, embezzlement from a trust, possibly tax evasion. If I access those records now that you've told me this, I could be disbarred for breach of client confidentiality. So you're choosing your career over what's right. The bitter words escaped before I could stop them. No, he said firmly. I'm telling you that I personally cannot help you, but you need to take those documents to the district attorney's office. Today, what your parents have done, are still doing, is criminal, and Mary... He hesitated. Be careful. People who have committed financial fraud for this long, who have this much to lose, they can make desperate choices. His warning echoed my grandmother's letter. Trust no one until I had secured legal protection. But now I felt more alone than ever. Who could I trust if not Wesley? As I left the cafe, a black SUV parked across the street caught my attention, specifically because it hadn't been there when I arrived. Through the tinted windows, I couldn't make out the driver, but a prickle of awareness raised the hair on the back of my neck. Was I being followed? I took a circuitous route home, doubling back several times, using store windows to check behind me. The SUV didn't reappear, but the sensation of being watched lingered. When I finally reached my parents' house, I found it empty, unusual for a weekday afternoon when my mother typically worked from home. Taking advantage of their absence, I went directly to my father's study, a room I rarely entered, and began a methodical search of his files. Most were mundane: household bills, insurance policies, retirement accounts. But in the bottom drawer of his desk, locked but easily opened with the letter opener I'd seen him use as an impromptu key countless times, I found a thick folder labeled simply ADC. Inside was the motherlode, a complete record of Ardmore Development Corporation from its inception, including its connection to North Haven Farm. The documents confirmed everything I'd suspected, and worse. My parents, along with Uncle Forrester, had systematically transferred the assets from my trust into the corporation, then sold off parcels of land and channeled the profits through various accounts, eventually dividing them among themselves. Most damning of all was a copy of a document bearing my signature, dated during the chaotic period after my divorce, that purported to relinquish any claims to the trust or its assets. I had no memory of signing it, but there was my signature, witnessed by a notary public named Hargrove. The same Hargrove my parents had mentioned in their late-night conversation. Beneath this document was a handwritten note in my father's distinctive scrawl: final parcel closing, October 15th, funds to Cayman account, F handling offshore transfers. October 15th, just 10 days away. I photographed everything, then carefully replaced the files exactly as I'd found them. I needed to act quickly, but I also needed to be strategic. If they sold that final parcel and moved the money offshore, I might never recover what was rightfully mine. That evening, my parents returned home with takeout dinner and forced cheerfulness. Uncle Forrester had apparently left for a business meeting in Philadelphia, but would return the following day. Throughout dinner, I maintained a facade of normalcy, even as I noticed new tension in my mother's smile and calculation in my father's eyes. "I've been thinking," my father said casually as we cleared the dishes. "Your job search seems to be stalled. Have you considered going back to school? A master's degree might open more doors." "Interesting timing," I replied. "I was just looking at some programs yesterday." "We could help," he continued. "Your mother and I have some investments that have done well. We could cover tuition if you found a program you liked, even somewhere out of state." They wanted me gone, I realized. Away from Ardmore, away from any connection to North Haven Farm or the underground room with its damning evidence. "That's generous," I said, matching his casual tone. "I'll definitely think about it. Though I'm not sure about leaving the area right now. I feel connected to this place, like there's family history here I'm just beginning to understand." My mother dropped a plate, the crash punctuating the sudden silence. "Sorry," she mumbled, kneeling to pick up the pieces. But I caught the look she exchanged with my father. Pure panic. That night, I waited until the house was silent before retrieving my phone and the documents I'd gathered. I needed somewhere safe to stay while I planned my next move. My friend Sybil had always told me her guest room was available any time, and she lived on the other side of town, far from my parents' prying eyes. As I was packing a small bag, my bedroom door creaked open. I whirled around, clutching my phone like a weapon, to find my mother standing in the doorway. "Going somewhere?" she asked quietly. "Just to Sybil's," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thought I'd stay there for a few days. Give you and Dad some space with Uncle Forrester visiting. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. In the dim light from my bedside lamp, she looked suddenly older. The lines around her eyes and mouth deepened by shadows. "You know, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered denying it, playing dumb, but something in her expression stopped me. "Yes." She sank onto the edge of my bed, shoulders slumping. "How?" "I found the underground room at the edge of the property. Grandma Claudia's records." She closed her eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing her face. "We should have destroyed it all years ago. Barrett insisted we keep the documentation in case there were ever legal challenges to the property sales." "Why?" I asked, the simple question encompassing decades of deception. Why take what was meant for me? My mother's laugh was hollow. "Oh, Meridian, you have no idea what your father was like when I met him. Brilliant, charismatic, ambitious, and completely reckless with money. His mother knew it. That's why she created the trust for you, bypassing him entirely. But she made you a trustee. She trusted you to protect my inheritance." Tears welled in my mother's eyes. "I loved your father. When Claudia died and we realized how much was in the trust, how much land was involved, Barrett was drowning in debt. His academic career was stalled. We told ourselves we would just borrow against the assets temporarily, replace it all before you turned 25. "But you didn't," I said flatly. "No," she acknowledged. "One investment led to another. Losses mounted. And then we realized how easy it was to create paper trails, to move money through corporations. Your father and Forrester handled most of it. I just looked the other way. And the document with my signature, the one relinquishing my rights to the trust?" She at least had the grace to look ashamed. "After your divorce, you were signing so many papers. We slipped it in with some insurance documents. You weren't paying attention." The calculated nature of their deception made my stomach turn. "Do you have any idea what that money would have meant to me? I lost my job. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I'm back in my childhood bedroom at 33 because I can't afford rent. And all this time, you and Dad had millions that should have been mine." "We didn't keep all of it," she protested weakly. "We paid for your college, a state school with a scholarship." I cut her off. "When I could have gone anywhere. We gave you a good life. You gave me the life you thought I should have while stealing the one that should have been my choice." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing nervously at the door. "Your father can't know we've had this conversation." "Why? Afraid he'll realize you've grown a conscience?" "Because he's desperate, Meridian. The final parcel sale is everything to him. If it doesn't go through, if there are legal challenges..." She trailed off, then fixed me with an intense stare. "Take whatever documents you've found and go. Tonight, get a lawyer, but don't confront him directly. Please. It's not safe." A chill ran through me. "Are you saying Dad would hurt me?" "I'm saying your father has spent 3 decades building a house of cards, and you're holding a match. I don't know what he's capable of if it all comes crashing down." The door opened then, revealing my father's silhouette. "I think you've said quite enough, Odessa." My mother stiffened, but didn't turn around. "Barrett, this has gone too far. We need to tell her everything." "There's nothing to tell," he replied, his voice eerily calm as he stepped into the room. Meridian is obviously having some kind of episode, inventing conspiracies. Perhaps those anxiety medications are affecting her again. The echo of his words from the conversation I'd overheard sent ice through my veins. He was already laying groundwork to discredit me. "I'm not having an episode," I said firmly. "I have documents, Dad, proof of what you've done, and I've made copies, digital copies stored safely online." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "What exactly do you think you know?" "I know about Claudia's trust, about North Haven Farm, about how you and Uncle Forrester created Ardmore Development Corporation to siphon off my inheritance. I know about the offshore accounts, and I know you forged my signature to complete the theft." For a moment, he seemed genuinely surprised by the extent of my knowledge. Then his expression hardened. "You've always had such an active imagination, Meridian, jumping to wild conclusions based on fragments of information. Your mother and I have only ever acted in your best interest. By stealing millions of dollars from me, by protecting you from responsibilities you weren't ready for," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what it takes to manage that much land? That much money? You can barely manage your own checking account." "We'll never know what I might have been capable of, will we? Because you never gave me the chance." My father took a deep breath, visibly composing himself. When he spoke again, his voice was reasonable, almost kind, the voice he'd used to explain difficult concepts to me as a child. "Listen to me, Meridian. What's done is done. The money has been invested, spent, allocated. There's no going back. But going forward, we can make this right." "How?" I asked skeptically. "The final parcel sale. It's worth nearly $2 million. We can set up a trust for you, a real one this time. You'll have financial security, independence." It was a tempting offer, a fraction of what should have been mine, but still life-changing money. But then I remembered my grandmother's letter. "Trust no one with this information until you have secured legal protection. And all I have to do is destroy the evidence and pretend none of this ever happened," I concluded. "It would be best for everyone," he agreed, "including you. Legal battles are expensive, embarrassing, and there's no guarantee you'd win. This way, you get what you need, and our family remains intact." I looked between my parents, my mother's pleading eyes, my father's carefully controlled expression. These people who had raised me, who had shaped my understanding of the world, of right and wrong, who had told me bedtime stories about honesty and integrity while systematically stealing my birthright. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This is a lot to process." Relief visibly washed over both of them. "Of course," my father said magnanimously. "Take all the time you need, but remember, the sale closes on the 15th. After that, the opportunity for this arrangement is gone." After they left my room, I sat motionless for a long time, turning over my options. I could take their offer. $2 million would change my life, even if it was a fraction of what should have been mine. I could pursue legal action, though, as my father pointed out, that path was uncertain and would irrevocably destroy my family. Or I could simply walk away, start fresh somewhere else, try to forget what I'd discovered. None of these options felt right. Something was still missing from this puzzle, something that explained the depth of their deception and their desperation to complete this final property sale. I waited until the house was silent before slipping out to my car. The documents I'd found mentioned a property manager named Hargrove who had been handling the Ardmore Development Corporation's affairs for years, the same Hargrove who had notarized the document with my forged signature. If anyone knew the full extent of my parents' scheme, it would be him. The address listed for Hargrove Property Management was a small office in a business park on the outskirts of town. At nearly midnight, I expected it to be dark and empty, but to my surprise, lights blazed from the windows and 3 cars were parked outside, including my Uncle Forrester's rental car. I parked down the street and approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows. The office had large windows with blinds that hadn't been fully closed, leaving a gap through which I could see into the main room. Inside, my father and uncle were engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with an older man I assumed was Hargrove. My mother sat off to the side, her face in her hands. I couldn't hear their words, but the tension was palpable even from outside. My uncle stabbed a finger at a document on the desk, while my father ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. The older man shook his head repeatedly, pointing to something on his computer screen. Moving closer, I positioned myself near a partially open window, catching fragments of their conversation. "Can't just disappear," my uncle was saying. "The environmental survey was filed with the county." "I told you both to handle that years ago," Hargrove responded, his voice gravelly, "with age or cigarettes or both. You can't sell contaminated land without disclosure." "The contamination is minimal," my father insisted, "barely over regulatory thresholds." "Minimal?" Hargrove laughed harshly. "Tell that to the EPA. One test and they'll shut down the entire operation. You're looking at millions in cleanup costs, not to mention fines, possibly criminal charges." "We just need to get through this sale," my uncle pressed. "The buyers haven't requested additional environmental testing. Once the deal closes, it's their problem." "Fraud by omission is still fraud," Hargrove countered, "and I won't be party to it. Not anymore." My father's voice dropped to a threatening whisper I strained to hear. "You've been party to everything else, Hargrove. Your signature is on every document. If we go down, you go down with us." "Maybe it's time it all came out," Hargrove replied, sounding suddenly tired. 30 years of covering up what happened at North Haven. I'm an old man, Barrett. I don't have much time left to make peace with what we've done." "Don't be dramatic," my uncle scoffed. "No one was hurt." "Tell that to Claudia Thorne," Hargrove shot back. The mention of my grandmother's name made me press closer to the window, desperate to hear more. "That was an accident," my father said sharply. "We've been through this 1,000 times." "Was it?" Hargrove challenged. "She discovered what you were doing with the chemical waste from the university lab. She was going to report it, and then suddenly she has a fatal fall on her own property, the same property that shows contamination precisely where you were dumping." My blood ran cold. Were they suggesting my grandmother's death hadn't been accidental? "We've all kept this secret for 3 decades, my uncle said. "All of us, including you, Hargrove. Don't develop a conscience now." "Your niece knows," Hargrove replied. "Meridian. She came to the county records office asking questions about North Haven and Claudia Thorne." "We're handling Meridian," my father said dismissively. "She'll take the settlement we're offering. $2 million is a lot of money for someone in her position." "And if she doesn't?" Hargrove pressed. "If she keeps digging, finds the environmental reports, realizes what really happened to her grandmother?" A heavy silence followed, broken finally by my mother's voice. so quiet I almost missed it. "No one touches Meridian," she said firmly. "No matter what, that's where I draw the line, Barrett." "No one's suggesting," my father began. "Aren't you?" She cut him off. "I heard you and Forrester talking last night about contingency plans if she doesn't cooperate, about how accidents can be arranged. I've looked the other way for 30 years, but I won't let you harm our daughter." I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. They weren't just talking about financial fraud anymore. They were talking about my grandmother's death, potentially her murder, and the possibility of arranging a similar accident for me if I didn't cooperate. As I backed away, my foot caught on something, a pipe or tool left carelessly on the ground, sending it clattering across the pavement. Inside, the conversation abruptly stopped. I turned to flee, but it was too late. "Someone's out there," I heard my uncle say, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. I ran for my car, fumbling with the keys as the office door burst open behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw my uncle's silhouette in the doorway, then my father's joining him. I started the engine and peeled away from the curb, tires squealing in the quiet night. My hands shook as I drove, mind racing through what I'd just learned. Not only had my parents stolen my inheritance, but they might have been responsible for my grandmother's death. The environmental contamination at North Haven Farm explained their desperate need to sell that final parcel before anyone discovered the truth. And most terrifying of all, they had discussed contingency plans if I didn't cooperate. My mother's intervention might have saved me for the moment, but I couldn't count on her protection. She had enabled their actions for 3 decades. Her moment of maternal concern might not withstand my father's influence for long. I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to Sybil's. That would be the first place they'd look. I needed somewhere safe to think, to plan my next move, somewhere they wouldn't expect. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself driving toward Ardmore Forest. The underground room where this had all started, my grandmother's hidden archive, might be the only safe place left for me. No one else knew I'd discovered it, and it had remained undisturbed for decades. The forest was eerily quiet as I parked at the small public lot used by hikers. Using my phone's flashlight, I retraced my steps from days earlier, finding the rotting log where I'd first noticed the mushroom fairy ring. The entrance I'd fallen through had been covered over, whether by natural shifting of soil or deliberate action, I couldn't tell. But I knew the shed on my parents' property connected to the underground room through the tunnel. If I could get to the shed without being seen, I could access the room that way. The walk to my parents' property took nearly an hour through the darkness of the forest. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. By the time I reached the edge of their land, the sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn glow. The shed stood as it always had, weathered wood, sagging roof, seemingly innocuous. I approached cautiously, alert for any sign that my parents had returned home or set some kind of watch. The property appeared deserted, the house dark. The door to the shed was padlocked, but the wood around the hasp was still damaged from when I'd forced my way out days earlier. With some effort, I managed to pry it open enough to slip inside. The interior was dusty and cluttered with garden tools and old equipment. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a rusty lawnmower, was the door that led to the tunnel. It opened with a protesting creak, revealing the passageway that led to my grandmother's secret archive. The tunnel seemed longer and more oppressive than I remembered, the beam of my phone's flashlight barely penetrating the darkness ahead. When I finally reached the underground room, I was struck again by the methodical organization of the shelves, the careful preservation of documents spanning decades. This hadn't been a hasty hiding place. This had been my grandmother's insurance policy, a record of everything my father and uncle had done, preserved where they couldn't find it or destroy it. I settled onto the earthen floor, spreading out the new documents I'd collected alongside what I'd found previously. The picture they painted was far worse than simple embezzlement from a trust. According to letters and journal entries from my grandmother, my father and uncle had been using a remote section of North Haven Farm to dispose of chemical waste from the university laboratory where my father had worked before becoming a high school teacher. The chemicals, primarily heavy metals and organic solvents, had contaminated the soil and groundwater. When my grandmother discovered this in the early 1990s, she had confronted them and threatened to report the illegal dumping to authorities. 2 weeks later, she was found dead at the bottom of a ravine on the property. An accident, according to the official report. She had apparently been checking fencing along the ravine edge and had fallen. No autopsy had been performed. The local doctor who signed the death certificate was a close friend of my father's. After her death, my father and uncle, along with my mother, had systematically looted the trust she had established for me, using the proceeds to create Ardmore Development Corporation. The corporation's primary purpose was to sell off parcels of North Haven Farm before environmental testing could reveal the contamination. Most of the land had been sold for residential development, neighborhoods where families were now living, drawing well water, growing gardens in soil that might be poisoned with industrial chemicals. The final parcel, the one scheduled for sale on October 15th, was the most heavily contaminated section, the very heart of North Haven Farm, where the chemical dumping had taken place. My father and uncle were rushing to sell it before anyone discovered the truth, before anyone connected the dots between the contamination and my grandmother's death. As the full horror of what my family had done settled over me, I heard a sound that froze my blood. Voices in the tunnel, urgent, angry voices growing closer by the second. "I'm telling you, her car is parked at the forest entrance," my uncle's voice echoed down the passageway. "She must have come back here." "How would she even know about this place?" my father responded, his voice strained. "The same way she knew everything else. Your mother and her damned record keeping." They were nearly at the door now. I looked frantically around the room for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere. Just shelves against earthen walls, no other exits. The door burst open, and there they stood, my father and uncle, their faces twisted with a mixture of anger and fear. Behind them, to my surprise, was my mother. "Meridian," my father said, his voice eerily calm despite the situation. "You've put us in quite a difficult position. By discovering that you stole my inheritance?" I challenged, backing away until I hit the shelves behind me. "Or by finding out that you might have killed my grandmother?" "No one killed anyone," he insisted. "Claudia's death was an accident, a tragic accident that happened to solve several problems at once." "Barrett," my mother gasped. "What's the point in pretending anymore, Odessa?" he snapped. "She knows too much already." "So what's your plan now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. Another accident? Is that the contingency plan you and Uncle Forrester discussed? My father looked genuinely shocked. You were at Hargrove's office. You heard everything, I confirmed, about the contamination, about Grandma Claudia's death, about your plans for me if I didn't cooperate. We never planned to hurt you, my mother insisted, pushing past my father and uncle to stand between us. Never. That's not why we came here. Then why did you follow me? To reason with you, my father said, to make you understand what's at stake. It's not just about money anymore, Meridian. If the truth comes out about the contamination, people could go to prison. There could be lawsuits from every family living on that land. Innocent families, my uncle added, people who have no idea their dream homes are built on toxic soil. Innocent families you put at risk, I countered. You could have come clean years ago, started a cleanup process. Instead, you've sold them contaminated land and pocketed the profits. It's too late for that now, my father said, his voice hardening. What's done is done. The only question is what happens next. I'll tell you what happens next, I said, drawing myself up to my full height. I'm taking these documents to the district attorney's office, all of them, the trust theft, the environmental crimes, the suspicious circumstances of Grandma Claudia's death. I'm going to make sure every family living on that land knows what you've done so they can get proper testing, proper medical care if needed. You'll destroy everything, my uncle warned, including yourself. Your name is Thorne, too. You'll be tainted by association. I'll take that risk to do what's right, I said firmly. My father shook his head slowly. I always taught you to stand up for your principles. I suppose I should be proud, in a way. But I can't let you do this, Meridian. There's too much at stake. He took a step toward me, and I tensed, ready to fight if necessary. But my mother moved between us again. No, she said simply. This ends now. From her pocket, she pulled a small recorder, the kind lawyers use to dictate notes. I've recorded everything. Your conversation at Hargrove's office last night, your discussion about contingency plans for Meridian, and now this, your implicit admission about Claudia's death. My father stared at her in disbelief. Odessa, what are you doing? What I should have done 30 years ago, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. The right thing. You're as guilty as we are, my uncle reminded her harshly. You've benefited from everything we've done. Yes, she acknowledged, and I'll face the consequences for that. But I won't let you threaten my daughter. I won't let this legacy of deception and harm continue any longer. She turned to me, holding out the recorder. Take this, Meridian. Take everything here. Go to the authorities. Tell them I'll testify to everything I know. My father lunged forward, reaching for the recorder, but my uncle caught his arm. It's over, Barrett, he said quietly. It's been over for a long time. We just refuse to see it. The fight seemed to drain out of my father all at once. He sank to his knees on the earthen floor, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. It started so simply, just a place to dispose of lab waste that the university wouldn't handle properly. Then the contamination spread. Then Claudia found out. Then one lie led to another. My mother finished for him, and another, until we couldn't see a way out. In that moment, despite everything they had done, I felt a flicker of pity for my parents. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of secrets and lies, and now it was all crumbling around them. "There's still a way forward," I said quietly. "Not an easy one, but a right one. Come to the authorities voluntarily. Help identify exactly where the contamination is, what chemicals were involved. Help start the cleanup process." "We'll go to prison," my uncle said flatly. "Probably," I acknowledged, "but you'll have the chance to make some amends, to do something right after so many wrongs." The sun was rising by the time we emerged from the underground room, my parents, my uncle, and me, each of us carrying boxes of documents that would change everything. The morning light seemed to wash the world clean, though I knew the damage my family had done would linger for years, perhaps generations. As we walked toward our cars, my mother fell into step beside me. "I'm so sorry, Meridian," she said softly, "for everything we took from you. The money, the property, the truth about your grandmother. She loved you so much. She saw herself in you, your integrity, your strength." "I wish I had known her," I replied, the weight of that loss hitting me anew. "You would have loved her, and she would be proud of you today." She hesitated, then added, "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I'm proud of you too, for standing up to us, for doing what's right, even when it's hard." The district attorney's office was just opening when we arrived. The receptionist looked startled to see the four of us, each carrying boxes of documents, requesting to speak with the DA immediately about environmental crimes and financial fraud. What followed was a blur of statements, evidence cataloging, and grim-faced officials. Environmental Protection Agency representatives were called in. Hargrove arrived, looking both relieved and terrified, ready to provide his own testimony. By afternoon, my parents and uncle had been formally charged with multiple felonies and released on bail pending trial. I gave my statement separately, explaining how I discovered the underground room, what documents I'd found, what conversations I'd overheard. The officials were particularly interested in the circumstances of my grandmother's death, though they cautioned that after 3 decades, it might be difficult to prove anything beyond reasonable doubt. When I finally emerged from the DA's office late that evening, exhausted but somehow lighter, I found Wesley waiting in the lobby. He rose when he saw me, concern etched on his familiar face. "Sybil called me," he explained. "Said you never showed up at her place last night. Then I saw the news about your parents being questioned in connection with environmental crimes. Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I will be, eventually." He hesitated, then asked, "What happens now?" "Now?" I considered the question as we walked out into the cool evening air. Now there will be investigations, tests of soil and water, notifications to everyone living on the affected land. There will be trials, probably plea deals. My parents and uncle will likely go to prison for some time. "And for you?" He pressed gently. I looked out at the town I'd grown up in, the place that held all my memories, good and bad. For me, there will be a trust restored. Not just the money, though that will help many people, but trust in myself, in my own judgment, in my ability to stand up for what's right, even when it costs me everything else. In the months that followed, the full extent of the environmental contamination at North Haven Farm was revealed. 42 families living on the affected land were notified, their properties tested, medical screenings arranged, My parents and uncle accepted plea deals, acknowledging their crimes in exchange for somewhat reduced sentences. My mother's cooperation in recordings proved crucial to the case. The trust my grandmother had established for me was legally restored, though much of the money was designated for environmental cleanup of the affected areas. I wouldn't be wealthy in the way I might have been, but I would have enough to start over, to build something new. The investigation into my grandmother's death was reopened, but as predicted, too much time had passed for definitive conclusions. The circumstances remained suspicious, but no additional charges were filed. Hargrove, in exchange for his testimony, received probation rather than prison time. Before he left town to live with his daughter in Arizona, he gave me a final piece of the puzzle, a letter my grandmother had written to me shortly before her death, which he had kept hidden all these years. My dearest Meridian, it began in the same handwriting I'd seen on the photographs in the underground room. If you are reading this, then my fears about your father and his activities at North Haven may have been justified. I have created a safe place for the truth, a place he doesn't know about. Remember the mushroom fairy rings we looked for when you were small? The magic circles in the forest? Look there if you ever need to find the truth. She had known that I might someday need guidance to discover what had been hidden from me. Even as a child of 4 or 5, I had been her confidant, her insurance policy against my father's misdeeds. 1 year after my discovery in the forest, I stood at the edge of what had once been North Haven Farm, watching as environmental remediation crews worked to clean the contaminated soil. The cleanup would take years, the land likely never fully restored to what it had been. But it was a start, an acknowledgement of past wrongs, an attempt to make amends. My parents were serving their sentences, my father 7 years, my mother 3 due to her cooperation. I visited them monthly. Our relationships fundamentally changed, but not entirely destroyed. Understanding their actions didn't excuse them, but it helped me make peace with the complicated legacy they had left me. With the portion of the trust funds that had been allocated for my personal use, I had established a foundation dedicated to environmental testing and awareness, particularly in areas where industrial or academic waste might have been improperly disposed of. It wasn't the life my grandmother had envisioned for me when she created the trust, but I like to think she would approve. I'd also used some of the money to purchase a small parcel at the edge of what had once been North Haven, an uncontaminated section where I'd built a modest cabin. It was there, among the trees where my grandmother had once walked, that I felt closest to her and to the legacy she had tried to preserve for me. On clear mornings, I still ventured into Ardmore Forest, basket in hand, searching for mushrooms. Not for money anymore, I no longer needed that, but for connection to the land, to my history, to the grandmother I'd never really known, but who had known me well enough to leave me the means to discover the truth. And sometimes, when I found a perfect fairy ring of mushrooms growing in a circle, I'd smile and whisper a thank you to Claudia Thorne, who understood that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the courage to seek truth, no matter how deeply it's been buried.